to see the light.
Yeah,
Yep.
so you should be good.
Yeah. Okay.
Hear the promises of God. God is near to all who call from their hearts. The desires of those who fear God are fulfilled, their cries are heard, they are saved. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, I will help you, I will uphold you with my victorious hand. O God, to pray, you know our needs before we ask and our ignorance in asking. Show us now your grace, that as we face the mystery of mortal life, we may see the light of eternity. Amen. Friends, we gather this morning to remember Penn James, who died last week at the age of 96. While California was the family's home for many years, with two particularly notable sojourns in Washington, D.C., the Jameses were quickly and eagerly adopted here in Greenwich, and is so typical it did not take them long to develop strong friendships and to become known in the community, especially for their service. Here at Second Congregational Church, Penn was a deacon, a confirmation sponsor, a member of our men's fellowship, all of them roles that depend on finding and fostering genuine connection between people. And there were few better at that than Penn. His professional achievements were many and remarkable. And in a way, his death is a reminder of the quiet passing of an era, and with it, a particular vision of duty, purpose, and mutual respect, even across differences. Were he here, Penn would probably interject that such a vision was hardly his alone, and that's true. But he shared it, and he served it, and he continued to celebrate where he still found it, even as his own life. So for all our talk of the passing of an era, we won't be honoring Penn properly without acknowledging the absence of a husband, a father, and a grandfather, and those most of all. What a life. What a legacy. There is so much to celebrate, and there are so many stories to tell. And so this is a moment to feel joy, as well as mourning, and gratitude, as well as grief. It's a time to feel the absence of Penn, but also the presence of God. And now I would invite you to stand as you're able for our opening hymn, Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee. The words are on the back of your bulletin. you please be seated? It's my honor to welcome Julie Carlino and Rob James forward for our scripture reading and the first of our remembrances.
The 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long.
I'd like to share a story with you that has profoundly impacted me since I was a young teenager. I remember walking with my dad to this very church from our house on Old Church Road. Along the way, I asked him, "Dad, are you scared of dying?" He stopped, turned to me with a big smile and bright, wide-open eyes, leaned in, and simply said, "No." At first, I was baffled that someone wouldn't fear death, as I had been struggling with the concept. But as I've reflected on that moment over the years, it taught me how to live a life without fear, but of rejoicing and joy. The joy and happiness in his eyes when he uttered that simple word conveyed everything I needed to know about living. It shaped my values, my perception, my character, and my entire being to this very day. I'll never forget it. It wasn't just the word no. It was the unadulterated joy on his face that spoke volumes. While I may have been a bit baffled as a teenager, I came to understand that he truly had no fear of dying because he was deeply in love with life. His face radiated everything beautiful about life, and the fear of death simply didn't exist for him. I've taken that lesson to heart and strive to live my life the same way. I endeavor to pass that same joy and feeling onto my sons, Jack and Henry. Dad, thank you for being a great teacher and for showing me how to live life without fear. I will do the same for my children, and they for theirs, and so on. You are an inspirational man, and I love you very much.
Dad, I know you are listening and watching so many here to honor and celebrate your life, and I am so proud to be your daughter. You encouraged me through years of shyness and insecurity, knowing I was capable of more than I believed possible. I learned so much from you, watching you with friends and colleagues. You instilled in me a strong work ethic and a commitment to be the best possible. Your lunches and conversations with me in New York guided me and gave me confidence. Delmonico's, the Sky Club, and the Union League Club were our favorites. You never failed to answer the phone when Rob or I called, no matter who you were with. It gave me strength to know you were always there. You also taught me to care for and mentor those I worked with and had in my life, to be selfless and help others. Life without you will be hard for us all. As we promised you before you passed, Rob and I will look after Mom and always be there for her. Thank you for being my father, my dad, and my daddy. You will be in our hearts forever. Rest in peace.
Unfortunately, Penn's grandsons, Jack and Henry, are unable to attend. They both wrote something, and they asked us to read it at this service. This is from Henry. Jack and I really looked up to him. He went from the streets to the president's left-hand man. He would do everything and anything for lots of people. He raised my dad and my amazing aunt to be great and inspirational people. He changed thousands of lives and couldn't have done better. He pushed all the way to 96 and was always looking out for me and Jack. He always asked about our days and always loved seeing us. He was truly an amazing man. He really was the best grandpa a boy could ask for. He loved seeing me and Jack grow up all the way to 14 years old. We truly loved him with all our hearts, and he will always be remembered to my kids and their kids. We will always miss him and forever love him. Jack and I wish we could have had more time with him, but he is now with all his friends in a better place. He will forever be looking after us in the afterlife. I can promise you that.
Now I have the honor of reading what Jack wrote. You know what the funny thing is? You only realize the importance of something when having lost that very same thing. Whether that be pets, family, memories, or dreams. They are all things we take for granted. That, however, changes when having lost it. Little do we know, everything we take for granted has a special place in our hearts, and we actually look forward to seeing them every day.
Now I'd like to invite Andy Hunter forward for our next remembrance.
Good morning. It's an honor to speak about the remarkable gentleman, E. Pendleton James, my dear friend and mentor. Thank you, Betty, Julie, Rob, and all your wonderful family for this humbling privilege. I was fortunate to be Penn's business partner in his executive search firm, Pendleton James Associates. I was the lucky one he hired so he could justify the S in associates. We were small in number, but mighty in stature, thanks to Penn's vision, work ethic, and phenomenal connections. I first heard of Penn when I was a young banker at Morgan Guaranty Trust Company. I would read his name in the Wall Street Journal, placing CEOs and board members at America's greatest institutions. He and his work sounded so interesting, I didn't know the half of it. Luckily, a decade later, I would have the opportunity to find out. His name surfaced in a big way when he assembled the legendary team that formed the cabinet and sub-cabinet of President Ronald Reagan's first administration. He successfully led the vetting of thousands of candidates for the president-elect's transition team and completed the hiring of all key positions prior to the inauguration, an epic feat that has not been duplicated. President Reagan wisely convinced him to remain as the official assistant for presidential hiring. In this capacity, he filled posts across all departments, government agencies, boards, and ambassadorships with historical results. Years later, I asked what he looked for when he hired the Dream Team. He responded, team players with loyalty, competence, and a ton of integrity. I continued to follow Penn's recruiting career when I became a recruiter myself. He was tops in the world, having trained with Gardner Hyatt and the founder of Heidrick & Struggles, and later opening the West Coast office of Russ Reynolds Associates. I will never forget the day I received the phone call that sent my spirits soaring. Andy Hunter, we need to meet. That was a typical Penn James enthusiastic habit he had of saying a person's full name. Thus began the best chapter of my professional life, in learning and working with the greatest. Penn was generous, kind, and confident, but never egotistical. He was practical, positive, innovative, and discerning judge of character. He also had a great sense of humor, which made our work so much fun. His global view and wisdom made him a superb mentor, providing me with formative lessons that are with me always. He taught me to think big, to aim high in the service of others. Here's one example from our early days together. He asked me to help him with research for an important client. I was hunched over my desk, digging through hundreds of resumes and potential candidates. He walked out of his office and asked, "What are you doing?" I looked up from my frenzied searching long enough to explain I was scouring the files to find the best candidate. Penn smiled. "Oh, you won't find him there, Andy." He then pointed to the view of the Pan Am, and he said, he or she is out there, not in our files. With the lesson of Penn's out there, expansive view not only encompassed the vast universe of top management, it defined how he experienced the world. He embraced each day as a source of infinite opportunity and interesting people to get to know. He wasn't going to allow me to stay staring down at a pile of notes on my desk. He insisted I get out there, which was the best career advice I ever received. With Penn, the sky was the limit. He shot for the stars and pretty much hired them all. As you know, Penn knew everybody, and everybody knew Penn. When Sarah and I were lucky enough to accompany Penn and Betty to the Republican convention in San Diego in 1996, we found out what it feels like to be in the blazing glare of celebrity. My gosh, we couldn't go a foot without someone stopping and greeting them. Perhaps what I admired most was that he was equally delighted to meet folks of all walks of life. He could walk into a convention of 300 dentists and he would survey the room, and with the eagerness of a little kid approaching a dessert buffet, here were more people to get to know. His example of seeing opportunity where others see obligation provided me with a wonderful career and the most joyful partnership I could have imagined. It was tempting to hang on to Penn's celebrity coattails, and I usually tried to resist. But during one fateful golf game in Florida, I was placed in a foursome with a bunch of guys I didn't know. I couldn't help myself. These guys were obviously sharp, classy, successful. At some point during the round, one of them asked me what I did for a living. I'm an executive recruiter with a small boutique, I answered modestly. The guy pressed me. Well, what jobs have you done? The firm had just celebrated another big placement of pens, which was the first thing that came to my mind. We place people like Mike Armstrong, I boasted. Much to my horror, the guy said, I'm Mike Armstrong. And so I wanted to disappear into the woods. But he was such a good sport about it and loved hearing that I worked with Penn. Still, every time I hear his name, I cringe. No tribute to Penn would be complete without talking about his partnership with the most beautiful person, inside and out, that we know, Betty. Sarah and I were lucky enough to know, Sarah and I were lucky enough to enjoy the friendship of Betty and Penn that extended way beyond the office, with trips to Palm Springs, to Provence in France, deep conversations, and so many laughs through the years. They supported us through our most important life chapters, always taking an interest in every member of our family and graciously entertaining us. They will ever be our role models as devoted parents of Julie and Rob, the proud parents-in-law of Gid and Harriet, and admiring grandparents of Jack and Henry. Most of all, Penn and Betty exemplified the qualities of an ideal marriage: selflessness, substance, partnership, and true love. They were soulmates on their journey from Sacramento to the heights of power in D.C. and New York, always sharing the same deeply rooted values: love of God, love of family, love of country, and devotion to each other. I shall ever be grateful to Penn, a man of great goodness.
It's our pleasure to welcome Jay Moorhead for our next remembrance.
Hello, Betty, Julie, Rob, so great to see you. So I first met Penn James in the Reagan transition. This was in 1980 when the president was running the transition process, and Penn was head of personnel, as you've heard. And it was a very busy and hectic time for us 28-year-olds. We were all looking to land a coveted job somewhere with the new Reagan team in the administration. I was introduced to Penn by a mutual friend of his, Drew Lewis. Drew went on to become transportation secretary, but was working with Penn in the transition period when thousands and thousands of phone calls, resumes, people were just sending up Penn on a daily basis. And I walked over to Drew because he had offered to help place me in the administration, and I said, "What can I do to help out?" He said, "Let me introduce you to Penn." So I walked over with Drew to Penn. He introduced me and said, "Jay did a very good job, Penn, for me and the Reagan-Bush campaign in Pennsylvania, and he's a good organizer." Penn said, "He is?" 30 seconds later, I was hired. And I was hired to help Penn organize paperwork. And I have to say that for decades after, from time to time, I was also asked to perform a little bit in that role for Penn. But Penn was, without a doubt, the most qualified person to ever lead the White House Personnel Office. He had previous experience, as you've heard, not only as a senior executive in the search business, but also from an earlier tenure in the White House with President Nixon, where he had also worked in personnel. So Penn knew what to do and what not to do. He knew that in order to make a new potential hire or a new candidate interested in joining the administration, you had to be able to convince them that it was the best job in the world and that they had the president's support. So what he did for the first time in a White House career was he went to Ronald Reagan and said, look, I need an office in the West Wing. Historically, presidents had been in the old Executive Office building, which is across the street. And Penn said, look, if I can bring these candidates in to the White House, if I can take them down and see my good friend Ed Meese or other senior executives in the West Wing, we can get any wavering candidate who is looking for it, who wants to have a job, we can get them over the line. And sure enough, that's what he did. It was just an example of Penn's savvy. He loved his role of calling potential candidates and offering them the job. He would love to get his list after meeting with the president and talk to them about the various opportunities and the excitement that was about to come. But what impressed me and others more about Penn that people don't think about was that he also took the time, after a candidate had been selected, to call the top 2 or 3 candidates who did not make the grade. And his grace and professionalism in talking to those candidates with the disappointing news, but thanking them for their willingness to serve, was one of his most admirable traits that I loved. Now, I have to say that not all calls went perfectly. One of the colleagues that I spoke to this week in asking for remembrances of Penn used to work in the ambassador part of the personnel office, and what would happen would be that once or twice a month, Penn would go in with a list of ambassadorships to talk to the president and say, we suggest this person for this role, this person for that role. And the president would approve, and then the list would go back to Penn, and Penn had the honor of calling those people. So one day, he had about 4 or 5 phone calls to make, and he picks up the phone to call one of President Reagan's big supporters, Max Rabb, who was gunning for an ambassadorship. Penn calls Max. Max, I've got great news. The president has just selected you to be ambassador to Switzerland. Penn waits for a response, waits some more for a response. Max responds, Switzerland? I give you New York for the election and you give me Switzerland? Penn immediately says, oh no, I am so sorry, Max. Italy. Yes, Italy. How's that? Max says, after a little pause, yes, Penn, thank you. Italy. That was Penn. So this past week, other colleagues that I've reached out to, and just remember, unlike Andy and others who you'll hear from who worked with Penn throughout his career, we were all working in 1981 and 1982 for Penn, and I was 28 at the time, and most of our colleagues in the White House staff were between 21 and maybe 35, the junior people. Those are the people that we were representing with Penn and who Penn had in his staff. There were probably about 60 or 70 of us at the time. One of those persons looked at me and said, here were some comments. Penn never went into any room or any event without introducing himself to everybody. There was a time when he went to a room where there were 300 Reagan supporters, an event with another colleague from the White House, And he looked around the room, or I should say the colleague looked around the room and said, "Penn, do you know anyone here?" And Penn said, "No, I don't, but let's fix that." And within 30 seconds, he had gone up to the closest person who was there, and he said, "Hello, I'm Penn James. What's your name?" And then very shortly thereafter, he would say, "How's the president doing?" He had this way, when we were around him, of going into any room and lighting up the room, giving a hearty laugh and that incredible smile that made everybody feel comfortable. So there were some remarks from one of Penn's closest colleagues that I want to share with everyone here today, Helene von Dahm. For those of you that don't know, Helene worked very closely with Penn during the Reagan transition and before that, working with Ed Meese very quietly to staff the administration. And then early on in Helene's career, in Helene's role in the White House, she came in to be the first secretary for Ronald Reagan, and then Penn got her promoted and moved over to work in the White House Personnel Office, ultimately rising up to become his deputy. After Penn left, Helene took over, and what Helene said was the following: "In my entire career, I have never met anyone with such integrity, such class, such poise, such character, and good judgment. Penn was my rock. Please let Betty know and the family that we were so grateful. I have always been so grateful to call Penn my friend." So, to those who knew Penn well, after 2 years, it was quite a stressful experience, those days in the White House. After 2 years, the stress and the commitment were becoming a little bit of a burden. It became harder and harder for Penn to bring in the highest quality candidates that he wanted the administration and the president to hire. And frankly, it was becoming a little frustrating for him. I had the office right outside his door, and I could see it. And he took me to lunch one day and said, "Jay, I'm looking forward to completing this mission, to going home and spending more time with my family, who have sacrificed so much and who have allowed me to take this role. And also, Jay, I want to get back to work and start a new business in New York City. This job has been the highlight of my career to date, but there are too many cooks in the kitchen now. It's too political. I'm ready to let others take it from here." So Betty, Julie, Rob, on behalf of all of those Reagan appointees and all of the staff who served Penn and served the administration so well, I want to again thank you. Thank you for letting Penn serve his country and spend the time, those 2 years, with honor and distinction. He will always be remembered. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Steve Scroggins.
So, Betty, you and Penn and Leslie and I met in this magnificent setting over 40 years ago. It turned out that Penn and I had some professional connections and had a natural personal connection as well. But then, as you've heard, who didn't have a natural personal connection with Penn? Within a few years, you became president of the church council here. Didn't take you long. And you recruited me to a finance role. I had just a few things on my plate, but you were one of those people that you really have a hard time saying no to, as was Penn. Andy and Jay have spoken about Penn's remarkable career and versatility from the White House to corporate boardrooms. One does not leave deep roots in California to dive into the world of D.C. without a healthy self-confidence. One does not sit down with James Baker and Ed Meese in the White House in those early challenging years of the first Reagan administration on a daily first thing in the morning meeting to review the administration's priorities for the day without a high level of savvy, common sense, and preparation. Tell you for sure, one does not put one's name on the door of a startup professional services business in Manhattan without a rock-solid ego. But what Penn had that is rare is he was utterly genuine, relaxed in his own skin, without pretense, without a personal agenda. He had defined points of view, convictions on issues, opinions on matters of the day, a willingness, indeed an instinct, to listen. People just trusted Penn, as you've heard. How could you not? But he was also a gifted raconteur. Perhaps 10 years ago, Matt and Kathy Singleton hosted a men's fellowship dinner at their house on a Thursday evening. As was the practice after the dinner, Max always asked a question to the group to answer and discuss. That evening, Max asked, what was a key turning point in your life, a key decision, a fork in the road, and why did you do what you did? When his turn came, Penn mesmerized all of us, telling the story of his phone in California ringing after Reagan won the 1980 election. On the other end was Ronald Reagan, calling to ask him to serve as a key personnel advisor, you've heard the story, in the White House to lead the selecting and vetting of all the presidential appointments. Penn declined. He and Betty had deep roots in California and were settled into a wonderful life. While he had great admiration for the president, he had done his share with his full engagement and support of Reagan in the gubernatorial campaigns that preceded it and the just completed presidential campaign. He had done a turn in the Nixon administration and had scratched any Washington, D.C. itch he might have had. Reagan was not having any of it. So Rob and Julie, as your father told the story, he pulled out the ace in his back pocket. 2 teenage kids happy in California in the schools where they were. Reagan responded by putting George Bush on the phone. Of course that's what you do. Apparently George just happened to be there. And George Bush explained to Penn that he expected George, might just be helpful with the Byzantine D.C. school process. And he hoped Penn would join Reagan's administration and the team. How could Penn say no? Julie and Rob, you know how proud your father was of all you achieved in your respective careers. Over the years, particularly once we were both retired, he and I met regularly for lunch, and he provided a periodic update. Rob, he covered your entrepreneurial real estate initiatives and success. And Julie, he talked about your moves around the world, literally, rising in the jungle that can be a complex Wall Street bank. He professed amazement at how successful both of you were. It was sort of a, oh, shucks. Can you believe it? My kids? This level of success? On one occasion, I finally commented, "Well, you know, Ben, they both have Betty's DNA." He smiled that sly, warm smile. And hopefully you've all remember it because it's such a wonderful smile, and said, "Yes, yes, they do." Penn loved his family. He loved this church. He relished his wide circle of friends. And he always, always, always noted how grateful he was for the long, fulfilling life he lived.
Well, it will not surprise you, given the news that Chuck Hagel was not able to get on the plane that he intended to get on to be here, so he sent his remarks, and Rob is going to read them for us.
As my mother requested, I want to point out Chuck was a two-time senator from Nebraska and Secretary of Defense under Obama. These are Chuck's words. I first met Penn James in 1981 in the Reagan White House. He was Director of Presidential Personnel and interviewed me for the number 2 position at the Veterans Administration. I somehow miraculously survived his intense questioning and quick judgment on my questionable skills. That was my toughest task and challenge of the nomination process. I did survive the Senate confirmation process thanks to what I learned from Mr. James. A few years later, we were reunited as members of the USO Board of Directors, along with his close Greenwich friend and political sidekick, John Becker. The James Becker team was not to be trifled with. During our USO days, Lilibet and I developed a beautiful relationship with Betty and Penn and Sheila and John. In fact, it was James and Becker who decided that I should be president of the USO. A very chancy decision for 2 such distinguished and wise directors and gentlemen. Over the years, I came to know Penn very well, many personal and fun outings and phone calls. Conversations were about everything. As you all know, who are here today, Penn had a clarity of thinking, sophisticated simplicity, common sense, rich sense of humor, unequaled decency, and abiding faith and love of his country. He possessed the 3 indispensable requisites of leadership and life. First, character, character, and more character. The most important of all. Second, courage. The courage to always do the right thing. And third, judgment. The clear thinking and understanding of people and problems that gave him that clear, concise judgment. Penn always said it straight, but he was always fun. Loved life, even during the most difficult of times. Penn James was a unique and special human being. He will be missed by so many because he touched the lives of so many. Lilibet and I send our love and prayers to all the James and his friends everywhere. Thank you for allowing me to say what all of you know. It's the mission of a politician to state the obvious. But this obviousness is a privilege and honor. God bless you all as the Saints and Penn go marching in.
Well, earlier this week, I spent some time reading the transcript of an interview that Penn did in 2003 for the Miller Center at the University of Virginia. And that Miller Center is a place that studies the presidency as an institution. No surprise then that they had tracked down Penn. And in this particular interview, of course, Penn described his time in the Nixon and the Reagan administrations, and he mentioned that among the many perks of having that desk in the White House was the opportunity to have artwork on loan from the National Gallery to hang on the wall. So according to Penn, the White House has a curator, asked him what he might like to have by way of art for his office. And Penn said that his hero in history was Benjamin Franklin. If you have something of Benjamin Franklin, that would be very nice, he said. And, the guy writes it down. And Penn continued, now my wife's hero is Thomas Jefferson. So if you have something of Thomas Jefferson, that would also be very nice. And the man wrote that down and said he would see what he could do. And sure enough, a couple of days later, Penn walked into his office, maybe after that morning briefing, and there on one wall was a pen and ink version of that famous coonskin cap portrait of Benjamin Franklin. And on the other wall was a nice oil painting of Thomas Jefferson. Now, there is a further wrinkle, and it turns into a very funny story, and Penn tells it in a way that is completely true to form. In fact, he tells it in a way that is so true to form that I am not going to dare tell the story. Only Penn can really tell it. But if you look it up, and I hope you do, I think you'll find what I did, which is that beyond just the sort of humor of a funny story, Penn's voice just lifts off the page. You can hear him. You can picture him. Penn had a particular way of telling a story. When he was on a roll, he had a way of kind of watching you from the side of his eye. It was like he had baited the hook and was gradually starting to reel you in, and his hand motions had a kind of reeling in quality if you think about it. But the thing was, whenever he moved toward a punchline, God love him, his smile gave him away every time. And so there he was, kind of watching you warily and doing his reeling, but your smile was like getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And clearly he could hardly wait for the other shoe to drop. And then it would, and he would erupt with laughter. He was a great storyteller. And yet I mean no disrespect when I say that no small part of the joy of his stories was just in watching his own delight in telling them. Somehow, the way that he did it made you feel so much more than simply entertained or instructed. Penn's way with a story made you feel like he was really folding you into his confidence. You were connected. He really did end up reeling you in, but in a much deeper, more profound kind of way, and you were so glad that he did. I loved that about him. I'll also say that it seems so right somehow that of all the nation's founders, the one Penn connected with the most was Benjamin Franklin. Like Benjamin Franklin, Penn himself was also a man who combined tremendously high ideals and profound practicality. Both of them were men of tremendous energy and curiosity. Both were great listeners. Both were dispensers of the best kind of wisdom, which is the kind that sounds maybe simple at first, but just kind of burrows in and goes deeper and gets deeper and more thoughtful as it stays with you, which it always did. Finally, both Ben Franklin and Penn James were men whose most fundamental affections and joys were astonishingly homey. They were welcome and familiar in the greatest circles of their times, but their deepest enjoyment may well have been in other places. For Franklin, it was his shop. For Penn, it would have been the garden or the kitchen, or just sitting on the couch, especially if there were oatmeal cookies without raisins nearby. Along those lines, it makes sense that because Betty's favorite founder was Thomas Jefferson, Penn would make a point of having a portrait of him in his office too. Wherever Penn was, Betty was never far from his thoughts. Betty, he was always just so happy to be where you were. Your nearly 63 years of marriage together may have been the proudest of his many accomplishments. He never lost a sense of his gratitude for your life together or for the family that you created. Speaking particularly as his pastor, I would add that one thing I saw abundantly in Penn was how powerful a life can be when someone does not seek to be the hero of their own story. Penn was never about Penn. He had his way of doing things for sure, and he was ready to stand by that way if he had to, but he was remarkably untempted by so much of what worldly success seems to offer. And this meant that he remained unblemished and unscarred by so much of what worldly success can ultimately demand. Not that he was not successful, for of course he was. But for him, most of that was fundamentally a distraction from what mattered. And what mattered was bigger than all of us. And he never lost sight of that. To conclude, what I find myself thinking about in this first week without him is just how much Penn's life embodied those things that he stood for. There's that wonderful old biography of Ronald Reagan titled The Role of a Lifetime. And I can't help but think that wherever Penn went and whatever Penn did, he was never playing a role in that sense. He was just being Penn. And to know him was to understand how deeply necessary it was that he was simply himself, nothing more and nothing less. Paradoxically, it was his groundedness that allowed him to soar. How blessed we all were that he decided to fold us into his confidence. And may we offer ourselves to others as truly and as fully as he did, and with something of his same tremendous joy. May he rest in peace. Let us pray. O God, before whom generations rise and pass away, we praise you for all your servants who, having lived this life in faith, now live eternally with you. Especially we thank you for your servant Penn, whose baptism is now complete in death. We praise you for the gift of his life, for all in him that was good and kind and faithful, for the grace you gave him that kindled in him the values that informed his life and enabled him to serve you and his neighbors. We thank you especially for his integrity, for his tireless commitment, his joyful storytelling, and his tremendous capacity for friendship. We thank you for his honesty, his loyalty, his cheerleading and encouragement. We thank you, as he would and did, for his nearly 63 years with Betty. Upon all that Penn was and all that he was not, we ask your blessing and your pardon. And we ask comfort for the family and friends who grieve him. We thank you that for Penn now death is past and pain is ended, and that he has entered into the joy you have prepared from everlasting to everlasting. May we who remain prove worthy of all that was good in him and live out that vision of a redeemed creation for which our Lord Jesus taught us to work and to pray when we are together, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Now, as you're able, will you please stand for our closing hymn, the one that Penn himself especially wanted, When the Saints Go Marching In. Into your hands, O merciful Savior, we commend your servant Penn. Acknowledge, we humbly pray, a sheep of your own fold, a lamb of your own flock, a sinner of your own redeeming. Receive him into the arms of your mercy, into the blessed rest of everlasting peace, and into the glorious company of the saints in light. And, O Lord, support us all the day long until the shadows lengthen and the evening comes and the busy world is hushed and the fever of life is over and our work is done. Then in thy mercy grant us a safe lodging and a holy rest and peace at the last. Amen.